Welcome back and many thanks for staying with us right here on Morning at NTV. I'm sure you're now wondering, how best can I navigate these roundy roads this beautiful Monday, the 2nd of August? Well, fret not. Stephen Mbide is in Nankulabi and ready to help you with the traffic update. Very good morning, Stephen Mbide. What's the latest without wasting any time?
Yes, good morning to you, Romeo Musiko. Of course, the wait, as I told you, is already over. Many people are now on the road already waiting for public means of transport. And here at Nankulabi, at least there are many people coming from the direction of Kasubi, coming from Nangona, Nansana, and they're already in taxis. Taxis are already on the road, very many of them, but buses, the coasters, haven't seen so many of them. But also, when you cross the road here, you see that there are also border riders waiting to transport people towards the city center, where they're going to be making a living there. Also, across the road, you also be seeing that there are some passengers waiting here to board at least a taxi or a motorbike there. But here, crossing towards the side of Namirembe Road, heading towards the other side of Lubia and joining Mango Hill side, you still see vehicles coming, also carrying people to capacity. They are carrying 7 and others 8 passengers because they were told to carry at least 50% capacity away from the 14 seats, because they are 14 seaters. Now that means they have to carry only 7 or 8 passengers there as they hit the road. And this coming from the city direction, using the Hoima Road. Still, you see vehicles moving, but not so many taxis are on the road today. At least many still have to do services, because this is one of the taxi drivers here trying to head towards the direction of Kasui side. This is what's happening on the road. You can comfortably be sure that you will not be finding any roadblock on the road. If you're a pedestrian, previously in the last week, you've been, 42 days, been stopped at the roadblocks, being asked to either put on a mask and where you're heading to. But now, a pedestrian, a rider, a motorist will also be just heading toward the city without anyone disturbing you. This is what's happening on the road. Back to you, Romeo Busiku, in the studios. I'll be back later on the ground with your people, real issues.
Very much, Stephen Mbide, for that update. Dear citizens, please, COVID-19 is still here. We've noticed an uptick. 94,195 cases have been registered right here in Uganda. 94,195 cases of COVID-19 have been registered, and over 2,696 people have actually succumbed as a result of the novel coronavirus disease. So before entering the taxi, if it is filled to capacity, do not enter. If it is not half the capacity, please do not enter the taxi. Do the right thing, even if you have a face mask, but if it's filled to the brim, do not do it. At least you would rather walk, because you do care for the people you left back at home, your children, your family members, who might actually succumb if you take back the Delta variant, which is highly transmissible. My name is Romeo Busiku. Of course, the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises have been battered the most, especially during the 42-day lockdown. According to the survey that is being conducted by the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, they contend that over 3 out of 4 of the surveyed individuals during the lockdown, who were actually 2,754, were actually not operational during that 42-day lockdown. They also contend that over 49% of the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises had to actually use their savings during the 42-day lockdown. Another callous development, over 68% resorted to the sale of business assets. I had to sell my business assets to actually make ends meet, not for the business, but at home. You sell your business assets to be able to make a living at home. That's how bad the situation was. John Walugembe is here. I won't preempt. He is the ED, Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. We also have Francis Muhire, who is an economist, and he also works with Makerere University Business School, with whom we are going to be expanding more on the plight of the MSMEs. A very good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Romeo.
Let me start with you, John. A very, very worrying report that you authored over the weekend. I was going through it, and I could tell you that beads of tears were forming within my eyes. I could see a struggling sector, especially the informal MSMEs were grappling the most. But first, break down the report for us.
Yeah, so as you rightly said, we surveyed 2,745 businesses in those areas where we thought that the pandemic would hit the most. We looked at Kampala, we looked at Wakiso, we looked at Mbarara, we looked at Tororo, we looked at Mbale, in order to identify how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the MSME sector. And as you have alluded to, 3/4 were not operational. This is correct because the president only allowed certain sectors to operate. He allowed construction, he allowed people in pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, a bit of logistics, retail shops. So the bulk of the businesses were actually not operating during this time. So our study found that to be the case. But as you said, a certain percentage had to rely on savings, 68%. And then you had 21% having to sell their business assets in order to go through the pandemic. So it's a very difficult situation. I think that's why the president thought that it's prudent to reopen the economy. And as we appealed yesterday, we want to tell the MSME sector, you know, the president emphasized the concept of self-regulation. Let's regulate ourselves. Because if we don't regulate ourselves, it's going to become very hard. We have to work, the economy has to get back on its feet. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we are alive. So it means that it's us to ensure that we follow these SOPs to the letter. If we don't do that, then we'll have a third, a fourth, a fifth, which is extremely difficult for the economy and for businesses. And then we also found that informal businesses were affected the most. People who work what they call you work today in order to survive tomorrow. So those businesses were hurt the most during this pandemic. And then finally we found that businesses in rural areas tended to sell more assets more than those in urban areas.
Why?
Oh, that's difficult. That's difficult to know, but it's what happened. It could be that people in rural areas have had limited options.
Limited access to credit and so forth.
No, in urban areas, some people tended to break the regulations. If you noticed, they were coming to town and so on, so maybe they were able to make ends meet. But in rural areas, it was rather difficult. So probably this is why people in rural areas had to rely more on the sale of their personal assets.
Meaning even though you were not restricted by the COVID-19 measures, you didn't have any customers to come buy your produce, especially in the rural areas.
Exactly.
Because the people you're trying to sell to were also broke.
Were broke, they can't move, so at the end of the day you have to dispose one or two of your own assets.
In your report, you also mentioned that even those sectors that were offering essential services, like in manufacturing, healthcare services, retail, were still also operating under 71%, majority of whom are still operating halfway under capacity.
True. They informed us that even those that were operational are operating below 50% capacity. Why? Because of transport disruptions. Customers can't really come. Yes, you're there, you're working, but customers can't come. The other reason could be the supply chain disruption. So you can't access your raw materials as you would access them in a normal course of events. So this is the situation of the sector. We are happy that the president reopened. I think what we need to do as a federation and other stakeholders is to ensure that our people really abide by these measures. A lockdown is extremely hurtful for the MSME sector. So we should do all in our power to ensure that we don't have to go into another lockdown soon.
Francis Muhire, we are banking the avoidance of a third wave on behavioral change. Isn't that a disaster? Can it be achieved?
Thank you, Romeo. Good morning, dear viewers out there. As he has put it, according to their study, micro, small, and medium enterprises have really suffered, but most especially micro and small enterprises, because that's where majority of Ugandans actually lie. Because when you talk of medium, they are heavily,
over 75%.
Yeah, they are heavily, dominated by foreigners or foreign direct investments. But you see, what is really happening is that the government has really left these micro and small enterprises alone. It has not done much to help them to stay afloat. And, the government should know that micro, small, and medium enterprises, especially the urban informal sector, they account for nearly, half of the GDP. You're talking about 42%. So they play a very key role. But unfortunately, the government has not really done much, and it really has to do much to keep them, stay afloat. Because when you talk of the real economy of Uganda, you're talking about these MSMEs. Yes. So there is, there is a lot the government should do. We've seen government coming up, with, mechanisms. One was, the central bank to reduce the central bank rate. But you see there's a difference between the central bank rate and the bank rate. And, the central bank or Bank of Uganda having a single mandate just, to control the price, not to, directly influence what commercial banks are charging in terms of borrowing funds. That's why it has not really helped. It reduced the central bank rate from 9 up to 65%, but still it has not helped avail maybe cheap credit to these MSMEs. At the same time, we saw over 555 billion shillings being, pushed into UDB after the first lockdown, and this was to help these, struggling MSMEs. But what happened? The money was put there, but the money disappeared. The next thing we heard that the money was received by a small clique of firms, and then they are saying that this is not for the main, SMEs who are struggling. So that's why the government really has to take these MSMEs as a very key component of this economy. Otherwise, what we are seeing right now, these are just short-term indicators of the impact, but the long-run impact is going to be really, really very painful. It's absurd that most of MSMEs are selling their businesses just to have food to eat at home. So you can imagine, at the end of the day, you need these SMEs because that's where you're going to get the tax from. The other thing the government did, which were the opposite, instead of giving, a fiscal policy stimulus package in terms of tax exemptions, instead the government brought new taxes. Come on, we are in a pandemic and you're introducing new taxes. It seems the government thought maybe the pandemic was going to be, ending, after 1 year. But a pandemic literally means that you're going to go through this for a long period of time. You might even go up to 5 or even 9 years, as scientists actually, anticipating. So the government has to change its approach, because the other issue I want you to look at is, first look at the way the government is spending, the spending behavior. It's like we are not in a pandemic. The way the government is spending is like there is no pandemic. But
we shall give MPs their 200 million each to buy cars, and later on we shall say we do not have money to fight the pandemic.
So that's the problem we have. We tend to have gotten our priorities wrong right off from the start. And this looks to be normal, but this is absolutely abnormal. How are you going to be, you're allocating over 110 billion for MPs to come and get cars? Remember, their number is also not small. We're talking about over 529 MPs, So the problem is not that there is no money. The money is there, but how are we using the money? Ugandans are still paying tax. Even the lockdown, you're paying tax. Whatever you buy, it's the only challenge is that, we have more indirect tax and people don't feel it. But every time, everything you're buying, there is a tax. So the problem is not about the money. The government has money. We're even getting loans on 28th June this year. We got another 1 billion US dollars, a loan from IMF. So you cannot say there is no money. That's why they are busy spending on cars, iPads,
John Walugembe, you do have 36% of the people you surveyed, the 7,254 people you actually surveyed, were they 2,000? 2,754.
Yes.
These respondents, many of whom, 36%, anticipate the threat of business failure. Correct. Now, you do have many people bringing up recommendations. They are saying for us to save the MSMEs, we need to boost the purchasing power of Ugandans. Is this a solution?
So, so when you have such a pandemic, it hits both what we call the supply side and the demand side of the economy. Demand side means people cannot buy, because for businesses to operate, people must have money to buy. Similarly, you must have people willing to supply goods and services. So if businesses are struggling with supply chain disruptions, if businesses don't have liquidity, then you have a bit of an issue. So when you are to intervene in such a scenario, you have to intervene on both sides. You have to intervene on the demand side by making sure that Ugandans have more disposable income. Sometimes governments give individual tax relief so that people have more money in order to buy. Sometimes people pay domestic carriers, like what government did the other year, to say, let's clear all domestic carriers, because as you clear domestic carriers, that money goes into people's hands, and they are more willing to spend. If you pay people, if you pay teachers, if you pay workers, if you do this, all that boosts demand. Now, on the supply side, you have to look at issues like tax relief for businesses. Okay, what kind of tax relief measures can you offer? Last year, when government was putting in place the stimulus package, we made a number of proposals. For instance, we said, please reduce the VAT rate. Please make sure that you give tax relief. But what government did is simply to defer tax. No problem. You'll pay the tax, but we are giving you more time.
You'll pay it later on.
You'll pay it later on. So And we felt that was a bit unfair, because if someone is not operational for 3 months, or someone is not operational for a month, like has been the case, for that period you are supposed to give them relief, okay? But now you want them to pay NSSF when their workers were home. You want to pay them to pay all these things when they were not operational. So we believe that's something that we can do, and most importantly, government needs to support businesses with liquidity. We felt that what happened with the UDB scenario was not the best. Thankfully, UDB is already rethinking. We had a conversation with the chief economist and the gentleman in charge of MSMEs, and they said they're rethinking their strategy with a goal to focusing more on the MSMEs, which is extremely positive.
So meaning, from the get-go, from the beginning, the focus was never you, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, even though when we were getting the money, we were saying this money is going to the MSMEs.
Well, we don't want to
Mafias.
assume. We just want to say they are now born again. They have realized that SMEs are important. So at whatever point someone sees the light, you welcome them with both hands.
This
so
is where we have to expedite accountability investigations.
We are happy that UDB really is now very much focused on the MSME sector. We are further happy that the president has promised to allocate about 100 billion of government resources to resuscitate.
Not 200 billion?
To offer. No, 100 from government, then 100 he expects to get from private sector investors.
Okay,
yes,
to make
so
200 billion.
The participating actually banks.
I see.
To make
that is 200 billion for the credit scheme.
To make 200 for the credit scheme. We want to engage with the central bank, rather with the Ministry of Finance, to see how best we can support in ensuring that this scheme really benefits people at the bottom of the pyramid. We want to avoid the situation where we just come to complain. It has not worked, it has not worked. We want to engage with a view to ensuring that this fund is designed in a way that benefits the SME at the bottom of the pyramid. In the village, who sold this goat during the lockdown, who sold this shop during the lockdown, so that they can be able to kickstart their business.
You know, it's really amazing and interesting that Mr. John Olugeme is being calm about this. But the man in UDB, none of his small and medium-sized enterprises that he heads got any of this money, because that we've been watching and waiting, trying to look at what is coming in from the Uganda Development Bank, whether or not the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises shall be tapping into that money. But guess what? None of them have been receiving any of that cash that would have helped these businesses get resuscitated. And then guess what? In July of this very year, we instituted more taxes that are going to make these small businesses suffocate. And according to the survey that was expedited by the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, 12% of those who were surveyed, the 2,754 respondents, were saying that they could default on their tax obligations. John Walugembe, expound more on that. The fact that, all right, we did not give you any money in UDB. Now we are instituting taxes, but 12% of the respondents you surveyed, 2,754, are saying they will default on those tax obligations. How bad is that?
If someone doesn't have food at home and they have had to sell their assets to eat, you cannot tell them that they have to pay tax, because there's a hierarchy of needs. And the basic needs, food, shelter, are most important to any human being. So, like my colleague has mentioned, you cannot introduce very extensive tax measure in the midst of a pandemic when you should be helping businesses to get resuscitated. For instance, we take issue with this 12% data tax. It's completely unhelpful, because remember, we are telling people, no, you don't need to move. Go online, go digital, do this. Now, if you tell someone, don't use this road, use the other road, but then you have put certain people to cane him, obviously when he sees them, he'll leave that road. So now you are telling people, go digital, but you have put an ambush of 12% tax on data, and people will say, no, I'm spending too much money on this thing. Let me stop. Let me do it the old way. Let me go and talk to Romeo instead of sending him a text message. Let me just talk to him. So we believe that some of these measures need to be reviewed. We believe that government also needs to look at additional tax relief measures now in the wake of the second lockdown. We also believe that small businesses need to be given more time. For instance, if a person cannot pay taxes now, please, URA, it does not help to keep placing penalty upon penalties. You know, sometimes URA collects more money in penalties than the actual tax. They may be demanding you 1,000, but then they create penalties and then they say the penalties are 30,000. So they become like money lenders. Where
From 1,000 to 35,000.
yeah, so we think all these things need to be discussed in order to help our MSME sector to recover from this very bad situation. What is sad is that we don't even know when it will end. There's a lot of uncertainty, as you rightly mentioned. We all are worried. Are we going into a third wave? Are we doing this? So that uncertainty also is extremely negative for the recovery of the economy.
All right, you can expand more on that uncertainty and how bad it is for business. Mr. Francis Muhire.
Thank you, Romeo. I'm also surprised of his calmness about his question.
I expected John to be spitting fire right now.
With what happened.
Yes.
But of course, just as I've said, a pandemic is a long term. We might, scientists have said, anticipated that we might even go up to 9 years. So, but when you see what is happening here, for example, when you look at the airport, we no longer quarantine those who are coming in, meaning that Uganda has positioned itself as a universal receiver of all variants, wherever they are coming from. So the third wave is absolutely, it's going to happen. But the question is, while we have COVID-19 in this equation, how are we managing the situation?
Go ahead.
So I want to take you back and show you where we have a problem. We have a problem of planning in this country. Or even where you have planning, it's not coordinated with
the reality,
the implementation, a strategy or mechanism. So that's why you're surprised that they have started to remember that SMEs are being, hit hard. No, they are not just remembering, but we saw everyone talking about SMEs, but
in fact, when they were putting that money into UDB, they said this money is for SMEs.
Yes, that was the justification to put the money there. But when the money reached, they said, this is not for struggling SMEs. So they are just playing their game as usual. So the problem is about planning, how you're allocating resources, and at the end of the day, you track and see the results. Not just putting resources and you don't track and see, if you've gotten the intended results. But as I've said, MS enterprises, let me first leave the medium enterprises and put them aside. They play a key role. That's where most of Ugandans lie. That's where the government gets more of its tax. So if it is not taken seriously, and you see even the other challenge is when you put the resources into UDB, UDB it's more of corporate, there's too much bureaucracy. So those people in micro enterprises, they will not, access that kind of money, So the government has to come up with a mechanism that can really avail cheap credit
with the trickle-down effect
to these micro and small enterprises. Otherwise, we're going to see long-term issues which are coming.
We'll return from this short break and talk about whether or not these planners in our government really care about the MSMEs. I mean, we're talking about other governments that focus too much on helping businesses stay afloat, helping businesses that had fallen into slumber get resuscitated and back onto their feet. But here you are. You have businesses that didn't get a stimulus package. You have businesses that are now being taxed to smithereens. I was in deep slumber during this COVID-19 pandemic, and still I have to foot some taxes in that regard. Why? The planners. That's a conversation we shall have largely when we return from this break. You're still watching Morning at NTV. Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us right here on the #1 breakfast show on the land, Morning at NTV. Yes, my name is Romeo Busuga. I still have Francis Muhire, an economist, and John Walugembe, the ED, Executive Director of the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. Well, they did conduct a survey on some 2,754 respondents in some areas of Gulu, Masaka, Jinja, Tororo, yes, and many other jurisdictions where they found out that over 49% of the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises were not operational during the previously just exhausted 42-day lockdown. And they also contained that over 36% of the same respondents reported the threat of business failure. Even as we are reopening, you have people who are saying, I might not make it, and in that regard, I should diversify and take a look at other ventures in that regard. I still have John Walugembe and Francis, with whom we are continuing with this very pertinent conversation. We were talking about the planners, whether or not they care about this country. you do have the first world or even other nations that are focusing on resuscitating businesses, that are focusing on, the livelihoods of the people in the business sector, especially in the informal sector. But here in Uganda, what are we doing? Money that was put into UDB is going to big business. Money that was put into other places has not reached SMEs. We also do know that many are struggling with the new taxes. What do you make of this? Do the planners really care?
Thank you, Lomi. Well, I'm not going to say they care or they don't, but one thing I'm going to tell you that the challenge we have in this country is the system itself. Even if, let's say, these planners cared, you're talking about technocrats, they want to do their job. The problem is about the system. Because the challenge we have is that, politics override, economics, it override even, these technocrats, way of doing things. So
even rational thinking.
So that's why the challenge is. At the end of the day, that's why you see a lot of irrational decisions coming out, The technocrats are blaming the politicians. The politicians are also good at branding, coming up with excuses and, saying that it's the technocrats or planners who are not doing their job. But, just as I said it, for example, when you see in the presidential address, when we were closing this lockdown, the president said for SMEs, we have directed, the central bank and Ministry of Finance to allocate 200 billion, Ugandan shillings within 2 weeks to help these, struggling SMEs. My question is, which criteria was used to come up to 200 billion shillings?
If the 455 with UDP has not even reached our people and it is too little.
That one disappeared. So 200 billion shillings, that is a total joke.
Yes.
You're talking about MSMEs, which employ over 80% of Ugandans, which contribute over 60% of the GDP. And you're talking of only 200 billion.
Over 100,000 businesses.
And to make the matters worse, it's only 100 billion which is coming from the government by further rationalizing the budget. And then the other 100 billion shillings is coming from the participating banks. But the participating banks are not just going to bring the money and give it to you. No, this is further domestic borrowing. And we're saying the other challenge already we have in this country is that the government is the biggest borrower. It competes with MSMEs. That's why we have one of the highest average lending rate. You're talking about 22%. So it's even the government is saying half of it is going to be coming from the domestic market and borrowing. So we are saying this is not how you're going to help SMEs. Instead, you're doing the opposite. So that's the challenge we have. About the taxes, as I told you, I called this a tax pandemic. And that's where, people have come to realize that a pandemic is not going tomorrow. How can you introduce, let's say, rental income tax? Talking about internet tax. MSMEs are trying, to adopt, to get on board and jump on, the global digital world. And instead you're increasing tax. And it's not only 12%, it's additional, because remember we have VAT of 18%. So this makes it 30%. So all these measures are really
instead of levying the 30% rental income tax on the landlord, we expected government to come out and say, okay, we are putting it out on all rental arrear collections, especially from the landlords and the tenants, so that you can put some breathing space on the business people who are operating within these business arcades. Well, now I've been in a lockdown, there's been no activity, no money, but I still have to pay the landlord for previous interactions.
When we talk of the real issues, we talk of the issues we have right now, that is actually one of them. We're talking about the tenant and the landlord issues. In the first lockdown, we were home for almost 3 months. Business people came back, opened their business, but they had to pay rent. Remember, they were not working. The government never did anything to help. And these are the, the rapid response we should have expected the government to come out and say, landlords and tenants, this is how you're going to do, solve this issue. But the government kept quiet about that. To make the matters worse, here comes 30% increment, which you're calling the rental income. Who is going to meet this tax? It's not the landlord. The government is targeting the landlord, but it's not the landlord who's going to pay it. The landlord will shift the entire burden to the tenant. So these are the people who are coming back. Most of them, their stock has expired during this lockdown. Now they have to pay rent arrears. So when we talk of real economy and the need of rapid response, these are the issues the government should be looking at, even before we talk of other things. Yes.
John Walugembe, 23% of the respondents you surveyed during your rapid assessment did embrace digital payments. That is a small number, only 23%. We would expect like over 85% to have veered into the new normal, which are the technological advancements. But why are there few people embracing digital payments and so forth?
No, it's not that they don't like. We must appreciate that.
What are the challenges?
Whereas abroad, when you say go digital, everyone can easily go digital. For us, we have fundamental challenges that hinder digitalization.
But Bariomo is watching and listening. ICT.
Oh, the minister. Oh, I'm happy to let him know that the number of challenges that limit digitalization. The first one is digital illiteracy. People do not know how to use digital means.
Because they are the majority in this sector.
They are the majority. Because I was in Masaka talking to MSMEs, I was surprised most SMEs had these touch phones. They didn't have smartphones. So this is a starting point. If people cannot afford smartphones, it becomes a bit of an issue. Secondly, if they don't know how to use these gadgets, it's a challenge. I'll tell you what the Federation is doing, but I'll just tackle the other challenges shortly. The other issue is about infrastructural challenges. You see, there are districts in this country where you have electricity for 1 hour or 2 hours in a week. Okay? If you go to Agago,
1 hour or 2 hours in the whole week of 7 days.
Yes. So now, how is someone going to go digital in such a scenario? Then the other issue also is that quality of connectivity. Yeah? Because now, sometimes you go, you find you have to climb a hill, it's not picking.
I thought that stopped in the late
it's
2005.
Sometimes you send a WhatsApp message and it's not, when you're in a valley, it's not picking. When you come up, it goes. So those are things we need to invest more in this. As a federation, we didn't see it. We approached the Uganda Communications Commission. And over the last 3 years, we have been supporting MSMEs to go digital. We've been running a digital skilling and literacy campaign. We've only been able to reach 10,000 MSMEs, but we have over 1 million. So you can imagine, percentage-wise, we are at 0.1%. Okay?
You have over 1 million micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises.
Yes, in this country. So who employ more than 8 million people. So we are at only 0.1%. So I want to urge the minister, please give us more money to roll out this initiative. We know there are a lot of constraints, but we are requesting humbly, please ensure that we invest in the digitalization of SMEs. The government will reap greatly, because that is where economic activity has shifted, and we need to push as many SMEs as possible there, because it's only in that context that government can tax better. Yeah. Yes.
All right. Expand more on that, Mr. Francis Muhire. The transition to the digital economy, what are some of those factors that have made it hard for our business people, especially the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, to make that huge leap to the digital world?
Thank you, Lomio. One thing we have to accept is that there is a new norm. You know, the world is transiting from analog to digital.
Indeed.
So when you talk of, global economic, digitization, the government, has to build this infrastructure. So we are talking of internet, internet use. But when you introduce taxes on this internet, for example, I'll tell you when OTT was introduced, 30% of internet users dropped down within the first 3 months. So talk about now this additional 12% plus the VAT, which is 18, and makes it a total of 30%. So we are talking of digitalization, but you're not building the infrastructure. You're making internet expensive. So how do you expect these SMEs, to get on board? So we are saying the world is moving. All SMEs, all kind of businesses, all different sectors, they are getting on board to embrace digitalization. Not forgetting about the fourth industrial revolution, which is happening. And when a pandemic or challenge is happening, one thing you have to note is that there are opportunities there. So, but it depends on how you position yourself. This digitalization, digitalizing the economy is a very good thing. It is to do with the fourth industrial revolution, which is ongoing. So if the government doesn't position its people to benefit out of this, then we are going to lose out. And we're saying the first thing the government can do, even before we talk of building the infrastructure, first make internet cheap. Don't levy taxes on internet. There you're the problem.
Indeed.
Yes.
Francis Mihira is an economist and also a lecturer at Makerere Business School. You also have Joe Walugembe, the ED Executive Director of the Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, coming in from Koboko, the jurisdiction where there is a security problem. I do have Mr. Rashula Didi ready to acquaint us with the latest. Police officers are being dismissed for aiding and abetting criminality. A very good morning, my good sir. What's the latest within Koboko?
Yeah, a very good morning to Romeo in the studio and our viewers. I have to say a very happy month to you and our viewers, not forgetting the team with whom you are together in the studio. Romeo, the new development coming in from West Nile region, especially Zombo district, is that the district police commander, the CID officer, and the driver have been recommended for dismissal from the police force after they were accused of aiding the escape of hardcore criminals who was involved in the rape activities at Zombo. Now, these police officers include the DPC, Assistant Superintendent of Police, Joshua Tongo, and then the CID officer of Zombo District, Paul Wazara, and two others. Appearing before Arua Police Court, these four accused persons or police officers were found guilty, and according to the records, or according to the police records, it indicates that this hardcore criminal escaped on his way as they were transferring him from Arua Regional Police Headquarters to Zombo Police Station. But however, on the way, according to the report, is that the DPC, together with the OCCID, stopped on the way with aim of arresting a motorcycle who was disobeying the presidential directive. So in the process, this hardcore criminal escaped, ran away, and they were not able to give update or give information to their bosses on time. So these four people, as I speak now, they have been recommended for dismissal. That is the DPC of Zombo District, Assistant Superintendent of Police Joshua Tongo, the district CID officer, Mr. Paul Wazala, and the driver whose name has not been identified up now. But however, Romeo, what I need to confirm to you is that when you look at these four police officers appearing before Arua Police Court, they pleaded guilty, and they have been given 14 days to apply before court to see if they can be in position to still be in the force or not.
Rashola Didi, before I let you go, did you, as an investigative journalist with us, NMG, notice an uptick in criminal activities during the just elapsed 42-day lockdown? Criminal activities during the lockdown, did they increase?
Pardon?
Did you notice an uptick in the criminal activities during the 42-day lockdown?
Yeah, Romeo, I need to confirm to you that looking at the region, when it comes to issues of the criminal activities within the lockdown, there have not been much. But however, with the recent instances that happened in Zombo, where unidentified rebels went on attacking the UPDF detaches at the district, and recently we also saw the chief of defense coming in to intervene and see how they can be in position to draw a mechanism to see that some of these rebels are arrested. But also something that I need to confirm to you, Romeo, before I go off, is that over last week on Friday, we didn't see that more than 14 people who identified as the rebels were handed to the government, and these people were handed to the RDC of Zombo district. So these were the people who were alleged to be connected to these rebel activities of attacking these detaches at Zombo district.
Well, thank you very much, Rashul Adidi, for that update. We shall task you as NMG and Morning at NTV to just keep a keen eye on this developing story, because we've noticed one too many times these individuals are recommended for dismissal, but later on they are just transferred to another jurisdiction. So we shall just keep tabs for us on this story to ascertain whether or not these officers shall be dismissed and not transferred. Thank you very much, Rashul Adidi. And of course, that's the latest coming in from Koboko. We do anticipate as morning at NTV to see an exponential increase in criminal activities now that we are reopening the economy, and so many of the desperate people who are struggling during the lockdown are now coming out and want to make a living. So many might resort to unscrupulous activities to make a living in that regard. So leading to an exponential increase of criminal activities as we reopen partially the economy. I still have John Walugembe and Francis Muhire, with whom we are expounding more on the impact of the previous lockdown on the MSMEs, the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, and how we should be navigating these challenges to ensure a continued or normalcy when it comes to reopening. A very good morning once again, John and Francis.
Thank you.
All right, John, we do know that many of the 42% of the respondents you surveyed had to diversify their incomes, income streams, and start new business ventures during this 42-day lockdown. So moving forward, how dire is this situation, and what does that mean, having to diversify all their incomes and starting new businesses?
No, what we found is that some businesses noticed that you can make money in a new venture. So for instance, a person who was operating a hardware store starting a sanitizer business, or someone who was in Chikubo starting a liquid soap business, because liquid soap is on market. I think this is, in addition to digitalization, this is another coping mechanism that businesses can explore. How can you because you see, in business, diversification is a way of reducing your risk. If everything is invested, if all your life savings are invested in a school, when those schools are closed, it becomes a bit of a challenge. So SMEs must learn to diversify. I know it's not easy, because you also need capital sometimes to start these new ventures, and sometimes you don't have the skill. But what we are telling you right now is that consider diversifying. There are sectors of this economy that have been closed for a very long time. If you look at the education space, if you look at the people operating bars, if you look at the people in the entertainment sector.
That bar can become a restaurant.
Exactly. So instead of operating a bar, turn that into a restaurant, because restaurants are allowed to operate and the infrastructure is pretty much the same. All you need to do is to start cooking food, remove the beers, and make it more amiable as an eating place.
And I strongly believe this is what government should have done during the onset of this pandemic. Offer recommendations to the people. If you are largely under lock and key and you are a bar owner, how can you start, a restaurant? But what we saw was on the head.
What you have in government are public servants. They are not business strategists. That's why the federation exists, to assist and tell businesses this is what you should. Because the people in public service know one thing: how to budget. And how to appropriate that money.
Even budgeting failed.
No, they budget. 44 trillion. It's not easy to come up with such a budget. So come up with a budget, then
but
spend the money.
MSMEs, you're not in that budget.
No, we are not. That's where the mistake was. You can budget wrongly, but when you have budgeted. So what we are saying for us is, please diversify. This is one way in which you can cope. The other way also is to look at new delivery channels for your goods and services. With so manufacturers saying Chikobo is closed, we can't really reach the final consumer and so on. Let's look at new ways of delivering goods. Not every manufacturer needs to have shops where they sell their products. Okay? So for me, these are all mechanisms that MSMEs can adopt in order to survive in the new normal. Not just MSMEs, by the way, even big businesses. Because if you don't take these things seriously, chances are that you might be left behind.
Of course, he is talking about the fact that not all MSMEs need a shop to actually sell their produce. Digital technologies, you do have the internet, you can always go to Jumia and any of these platforms and become a vendor. You don't really have to be in Chikubo. That's for a fact. So information dissemination, I believe, is the biggest pointer here. The business owners having this information and using it the right way.
And literacy, being taught, this is how they use Jumia, this is how they use this platform, this is how you take a picture, you need a good quality picture, this is how they post it. All these things are important. We should not assume that just telling some, go online is enough. We should handhold them and give them the tools in order to transition. And that's what the Federation has been doing with the Uganda Communications Commission over time. As I said, we've only reached 0.1% of our target market. Yeah.
Would it be safe to say that there are still some MSMEs that are still at home who are not going to reopen their businesses simply because they are just uncertain of the future? They're just saying, I do not know whether or not we are going to go back into the second or third lockdown within 2 weeks, so I'm going to stay home.
Well, you have a situation that we alluded to earlier, but it's a very serious issue.
People who have given up.
No, the issue of rent. Okay, because these landlords insist that before you enter the building,
You need to pay.
You need to pay. Okay, so for me, government needs to find a solution to this issue. At the very least, they need to act as an honest broker so that landlords and tenants can reach a fair agreement. The burden should not be passed on fully to the tenants because this lockdown is not their fault. Saying that landlords are cushioned, government is cushioned, government still collects taxes, landlords still collect everything, NSSF still collects, National Water is busy disconnecting people. No. We cannot pass the entire burden to the micro businesses. We must be fair, and I think this tax issue needs to be, rather this rental issue needs to be addressed.
All right.
Secondly, we need to give our people hope. Okay, I see a lot of people, oh, we are about going to, a fourth lockdown has come, a fifth is about to arrive. No, we need to also avoid fear mongering. Yes, the threat is real, but let's give our people hope so that the economy can get back on its feet. You know, we cannot fight this pandemic with a very weak economy. Yeah.
All right, Francis Muhire, expand more on the diversification of income streams by these businesses and how it is really important.
Thank you. Diversification is very important, and you know, especially in these challenging times, that's when you need to think beyond outside the box itself.
Indeed.
So diversification is really very important, and just as he has put it, most of business people, micro, small, medium enterprises, they have diversified. They have changed their lines of businesses because now you have to fit in what is demanded. You have those goods and services which are no longer being demanded, but then you also have those which have come up. So it's a very good thing, but just as I said earlier, the government has the biggest role to play for these MSMEs to actually embrace these new changes, because accept or not, this is the new norm. You have to adjust and adopt the new changes, which needs to diversify your sources of income. But the government should really put in mechanisms that are going to help MSMEs and even other struggling sectors.
What kind of mechanisms?
Before I talk of the mechanisms, one thing we need to know is that, just as I put it, that COVID-19 is still here. This is a pandemic. We might see it even for more than 5 years here. We are saying that the solution is vaccination. The last time you saw the president was, not happy with foreigners that they are holding the vaccines. And this is what we've been talking about. When you talk of the vaccine themselves, it's business model. It has been monopoly for a long period of time. You just have about 4 pharmaceutical companies which have been into this 1.3 trillion, business. So for them, they always want to maximize profits. They want to sell who has, the biggest profit margins. And that's why for them, they have hoarded. Those developed economies have booked in advance, and a country like Uganda, we cannot get vaccines even if you have the money. So what do we learn from this? This technology you're talking about, the mRNA, it was developed, they started the development 10 years ago. The government had to invest in basic science so that the private firms can come late on board, because this involves huge investments. So a country like Uganda, what do we learn from this? That's why every time you're talking about how are you allocating resources, you're not allocating resources to the most important sectors, which is education, health, and agriculture. But most especially education. That's where basic science starts from, developing your own vaccines. We need the homegrown solutions.
We need the homegrown solutions, and in that regard, before I let you go, John Walugembe, what are some of those homegrown solutions which we should take a look at? Continuation of the 100,000 grant?
Yes, they should continue, because there are people at the bottom of the pyramid who cannot survive. So let that 100,000 continue, but in a transparent way. Let's also consider support building the capacity of MSMEs in business resilience. Let's not just give money. Money on its own, yes, money is a solution, but money on its own is not everything. Let's support them to come up with business resilience and continuity plans, and then the funding should be able to be directed at actualizing those plans. let's ensure that businesses get quality advice from business associations and business women service providers. It's extremely, extremely important.
John Walugeme and Francis Muhire, many thanks for having made the time to speak to Morning at NTV. Let's now go to Ms. Mbide, who is in downtown Kampala. A very good morning, Ms. Mbide. What's the latest coming in from downtown Kampala? Morning. Mbide, you are in downtown Kampala. What is the latest, my good brother?